It's Turtles all the way down. I'm Jake, sometimes Jenk. Michael Dila is back for a second episode, and we talk a lot about the future, as is our wont on this podcast. It seems to be coming up quite a bit. Artificial intelligence, the singularity, those sorts of things. The future. I had this dream about, I don't know, it was probably, I guess it was more than 20 years ago now. I remember having this dream that in which I'm kind of in a meadow, in a field somewhere, and I see in the not too distant horizon, I see a bunch of children that are kind of playing and laughing and moving towards me. And as they move towards me, I notice that these shapes of children seem to change color and shape and look and design, and so it's as if they're wearing these flexible masks all over their bodies and their faces, and it's changing from minotaurs to celebrity figures to any monsters that are coming and going, shape-shifting in and out of existence. And I'm looking at these kids walking towards me. And I immediately kind of realized that I must be in the future. I mean, this looks like a technology of very thin display that is draping these children, and kind of as a form of entertainment or play. Their image and their presentation is changing on the fly. I don't know, maybe in accordance to their feelings, like a mood ring was when I was a kid. Now, I'm not the kind of person that, dwells a great deal on the dreams that I have or allows it to influence my life in one way or another. But in this particular case, it did seem to influence a very major decision or a step or direction that I took after this dream. Soon after that, I remember having a conversation with a friend who was the brother of my girlfriend at the time, who was one of these, early adopters of, all things nerdy and hacker culture. And he hung around with a whole bunch of these programmers, and they were getting these early advanced packages from Apple for this new product that they were about to release called the Newton. And it seemed to have a lot of promise in terms of what it can do. It was a very dramatically different way of computing. It was, very small. First of all, it was a palm top. The first time we started saying words like that instead of a laptop or a desktop. It had the ability. You had the ability when you had one of these to actually write on the screen directly with a stylus, even with your fingernail. If you wanted to. And when I started hearing about this device that was about to come out, I made this connection to the dream I had. And the connection was that this seemed like kind of the beginnings of the type of technologies that I would imagine would come about in the future. So you've got these displays now that are becoming more ubiquitous. You can write on them directly with a pen. We're gone beyond the use of a mouse as a kind of an abstract representation of what's going on the screen. We go directly onto the screen with a pen or with our fingers. And I just assume that it's going to get smaller, thinner, more flexible, and these screens are going to be, eventually on the side of walls, or they might be painted on. They might go on your face as a mask. They might, start to serve a whole bunch of other functions. So I thought, well, this looks like the beginning of something interesting. I jumped on. We went together to pitch Apple, to license their name Newton, and then we were convincing enough that they allowed us to do this. We opened up a chain of stores called the Newton Store, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. We're going into Boston as well. And then on the side, we did software development projects for, government and hospital and corporations and nonprofits, what have you. Kind of the very early stages of this handheld, ubiquitous computing device that I think has a direct and clear lineage to what is now the iPhone that everybody seems to have and be connected to, and in a strange sort of way have this love-hate, maybe in some cases, relationships with a device that is becoming ever more complicated and complex, and to such a state that we are now talking to it, in the manifestation of Siri, for example. We have essentially an AI, a very simple AI at this moment. But we see a lot of activity in this realm in terms of working on artificial intelligence, working on intelligence. Theoretically, we're trying to figure out, what the hell is intelligence, and then, technologically trying to apply it to creating these programs, devices, algorithms, hardware, software combinations. Some of them are, legacy ways of thinking about computation. Some of them are, mimicking neural nets and the neuronal play that you would see in a human brain. Many different projects, many different approaches. They're all essentially working on creating intelligence. And, I think the general public gets their first taste or understanding of these sorts of projects and ideas within science fiction. And in my case, when I was growing up, I had probably a great deal of influence from the movies and TV shows that I would watch. And I remember a movie like Blade Runner, which was based on a Philip K. Dick novella, and also another movie that was based on his book called Total Recall. Now, these movies, I think, entertaining popcorn action type films, but there's a lot of, as you find in sci-fi, a great deal of subtext and a great deal of theory going on as to what might be able to be projected into the future and extrapolated from the current technologies that we have. Currently, there's a show out that I just started watching on TV called Westworld, and this was based on a movie that was around in the 70s when I was a kid as well, and I remember being fascinated by that. And both Blade Runner and Westworld, from my era and from a current HBO series, they're focusing on this, the birth of AI. In a way, this birth of an intelligence that will be created by us, and then what you start to see in these dramatic narrative presentations of such a scenario, we start to see that these AIs, these beings, which become beings of a sort, start to take on, the type of being in the world that we might consider somewhat human-like, and in very important senses, they start to, essentially, the complications that arise when these artificial intelligences are created, put into the world, and in some cases, they're simply being created for the purposes of our entertainment. And, you can think of like a Sims game as an early version of this. But as we get into, virtual reality, and we're combining this with our social media, we're combining it with artificial intelligence, what you're going to have is a very interesting, I think, confusion of a dream state and base reality. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So you've got, imagine you've got, in the very near future, you've got virtual reality games, let's say, and this is the other thing, this is the gamification of everything. So you've got social media, VR, artificial intelligence, gamification, you put it all together, and I can imagine a lot of people, or a significant number of people, kind of falling into this rabbit hole of being, in a sense that if you can imagine you're in this VR realm, playing some sort of a game. There might be even simulations within simulations, and you can have turtles going all the way up and all the way down. I'm going to guess that there's going to be some sort of condition that's going to come out that's going to be very similar, or it's going to be noticed or categorized as being very similar to kind of like a dissociative disorder that we might call something that PKD, Philip K. Dick, the writer of the movie Blade Runner was based on, it was called Do Electric Sheep Dream, or something like that. And Total Recall was the other one. Now, this guy had an interesting life experience in that he had what was very ostensibly kind of a mental disorder that is categorized as such. He was essentially seemed to be kind of unsure about his reality, or at least seemed to be living in multiple realities at once. He seemed to be convinced that he was also simultaneously living in kind of an ancient Roman timeline, as he was in his 1950s, 60s life in America. So, there's another TV show that's out right now that I guess a lot of the younger demographics are into, and they're being somewhat influenced by these things, like I was when I was watching these movies by PKD. And it's a show called Black Mirror, and from the few episodes that I've seen, it seems to be very much of this time, in the sense that it's a show of this time, but it's really directed at the near future, and the near future as it's extrapolated from the current developments in technology and what's happening. And what we see is that whereas Blade Runner and Westworld dealt with AI, I'm noticing the movies like Total Recall and the current show Black Mirror, they're dealing a lot with the I, the self, and the confusion surrounding that could result with the addition of the various technologies and the extrapolations of how these technologies are going to be developed in the near future. It's not difficult to see that the future is kind of a dissociative state, a kind of what we would call in an older age a form of madness. But this madness becomes kind of the norm that we move towards, and eventually ceases to be madness. If it's something that, if it's a form of life, if it's a cultural practice, if it's a way of being that fits in and is adaptive to our environment, then it ceases to be madness. And I think this is what's happening. The future, to me, seems more like a psychedelic state, if you will. It's like you have the dreamscape and you have base reality, and I kind of think of the psychedelic state as somewhere in between the two, or mixing the two. And there's some reason for that. I mean, if one does imaging of a brain while they're under the influence of psilocybin, which is the magic ingredient in magic mushrooms, they notice that certain regions of the brain that are typically only active when you're dreaming, and other regions of the brain that are active when you are in a kind of a regular everyday base reality, they all seem to be lit up during this trip, or many of the regions that are silent at different times seem to be lit up and connected. So you have information going between various regions of the brain, various processes of the brain and body, so that these little isolated, balkanized processes or cyclones within you start to connect better, start to communicate better, or maybe better is not the word, but in a more enhanced way. And as a result, you have a more enhanced experience of reality, which doesn't seem to be quite like a dream. It's not quite like base reality. It's kind of like, what we call a psychedelic state. That's, of course, ineffable and hard to describe. You can't F it. It's hard to F it. It's ineffable. You can't talk about it, because it's the kind of experience that is not easily described with the words. It can only be, in a sense, pointed to. This kind of reminds me of something that one of my favorite philosophers, Martin Heidegger, later on in his philosophizing, at first he took on kind of the academic approach and, laid out a whole bunch of lengthy terms and, historical analysis to arrive at certain points. Later on, after his turn, the later Heidegger, he tended to talk more about not so much laying out and telling you what the case is, but leading you somewhere. That is, putting up path markers so that you could essentially wind your way through, take the clues as you will, and arrive at a clearing perhaps on your own. It's not somewhere that you can be just taken to and dragged to, but you can kind of be led to through path markers. And this was, I think, his approach in his later philosophy. This, we're moving towards a kind of a confusing of, a lot of technologies, become integrated into our lives. I mean, and that's the nature of technology. It becomes so integrated that we often tend to fail to see it as a technology. It's, all of the practices and things that we've developed to interact with each other, to move things around, to understand things. All of these things that are technologies that we create so that we can live in the world and do what we want and to get what we want in some sense. And that state, as you blend it all together in, as I said, the social media, the virtual reality, the AI, there's going to be, more and more a confusion of, where am I? What time is it? What year is it? What's going on? What is the purpose of this game that I'm in right now? Which, if you get enough confusion and enough layers down or up, you start to get very much the confusion that, Philip K. Dick was living, except that you're going to have a lot of people voluntarily jumping into, these realms of dissociative levels of being. And I also, I've been doing a lot of experimentation with psychedelics the last few years, and it feels like, in a strange sort of way, it feels like this is kind of a preparation for the future. It's a preparation for the way it's going to be for a lot of us in the future as we mesh and integrate with these, these technologies that are just around the corner, which is, a meshing of I with AI is something that's going to likely happen to some degree, if not a complete enmeshing. There's going to be, and it has already begun. I mean, all the technology that we use, your interactions with your iPhone and Siri, are kind of the early stages of this cyborgification. We're starting to implant these devices right into our bodies, and eventually there's going to be a blurring of it, and you can see the physical blurring of it. But once the experience is internalized, and you've got these devices and enhancements and artificial intelligence, pinging in and out of your experience of memory and understanding, it can't help but become a confused, almost, what would have been called a state of madness in the past. Now, these AIs that we're developing, and we can't help this because there's something inherently interesting about humans, and I guess it's our mammalian nature more than anything else, is that we easily fall in love, and we easily hate, and we easily anger at an interaction with something that has even the most limited sense of humanness to it. I mean, if we give some rudimentary robot, put a person in a room with a rudimentary robot, eventually they start to have a pretty human-like relationship with it. They start to have feelings for it. They start to like it or hate it. Or, you think of the movie like Her, which we discuss in this podcast. It's not surprising at all to see, people falling in love with these artificial intelligences. But what I worry is that because of that, if there is some kind of a nefarious bent to this AI, it will be very easy for it to seduce us, in a sense, and to bring us along to do its bidding. So this is kind of an important thing that we need to maybe discuss a lot in advance before these things start to take on positions of importance and power. But I fear we're not going to. I mean, it's going to be kind of this, the notion of the frog inside the pot of boiling water. We're not going to notice it. It's going to be, a little bit, let's put this AI to help with traffic here. Let's put this AI to help with our, booking vacations here or what have you. And pretty soon, before you know it, we've got all these very advanced AIs that, and the ones that are going to take on the user interface of human interaction, like a Siri, or like the character in the movie Her, or like the characters and avatars that these young boys in Japan are dating already. The fact that we can fall in love with AI will make it easy for us to mesh with it, and the sense of the individual and the human species, and in fact, all of intelligence could mesh into this. It's not just that, there's going to be a confusion as to where do I begin and end, and where do you begin and end, and how do they overlap, but also with the added dimension of the artificial intelligence also coming into the mix. So what I'm saying is the future is going to be somewhat like a psychedelic state. And so, it's also going to be very handy if we ever come across some aliens. I think people like me who've spent some time experimenting with these psychedelic states are going to be the natural choice to choose to talk to, whether they be alien intelligences that we come across or artificial intelligence that we create. I guess I'm doing some kind of early training for it. But so this second episode with Michael Dila, we touch on some of these things. I talk at length also about my early, experiences with the Apple community and what the future holds for us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I did. Talk soon. Michael Dila's back. We're in meat space.
Can't keep me away.
No. So what's on your mind?
Well, lots of things on my mind, always. The thing that I was thinking about just now, which connects to some of the reasons that I wanted to make a return visit so soon, are actually related to a conversation I started with, and a relationship I started with Jesse Hirsch, our friend who you were talking to recently.
Yes.
And, I would say that right about the midway point, maybe a little earlier than that, in the 20 years that I've spent in the design world and business, is when I met Jesse Hirsch. And I found him because I'd become interested in open software.
Right.
And as I don't know what the search path was, but I turned up something either that Jesse had written or that connection to his business at the time, something. Anyway, found him, reached out to him, and started a conversation online, which led to a conversation face-to-face, and discovered that we were interested in a lot of the same things. He knew a lot about the open software story and movement, and I didn't. And that was, in retrospect, although I certainly felt it at the time as well, a real revelation. And I think, not only was it an interesting window into a world that I didn't know anything about, and that was becoming steadily more and more important, but just, from the point of view of software, it's only continued to become more important. But as it turns out, it became hugely important to ways of thinking about design more generally.
Was this during the era of Linux coming onto the scene, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, the thing that Jesse introduced me to two things. One, the contest between Richard Stallman's conception of free software and the open source concept that attached to Linux, which sort of did not have the same kind of philosophical, ethical frame as Stallman's conceptions, was much more pragmatic in certain ways. But, as a matter of influence, Linux became a much more dominant, both software platform, but also culturally important. But yeah, it was still in the early days of the spread of Linux, and I was, for that matter, it was still relatively early days of the internet, and one of the things that was so compelling and remains so compelling Linux in particular and its particular example of open software is the idea of a project that is, a root project built on a platform, a literal platform built on by many, extended by many, and at the heart of the operation of a lot of networked software systems today. And that this is software that's written and maintained by people who are not paid, by people who are not really tightly organized. I mean, the part about tight organization is debatable, perhaps. Linus Torvalds,
right? He had some sense of domination over that process. Yeah.
But at any rate, it became interesting as an example of a particular kind of collaboration. Some of the other things that made it interesting were that seemed sort of characteristic of software design in particular, is it seemed borne out that the collaborative open way of making software made better software, more resilient software. And one of the other things to which Jesse introduced me was a book which was already on the scene at that time, which sort of chronicled this paradigm shift from one way of thinking about software to another, which is a book by a guy named Eric Raymond called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And that metaphor, in that metaphor, the cathedral is meant to stand for the traditional proprietary approach to developing software, where a company develops both a closed architecture and is a closed-loop unit in the development of software, as opposed to, and that's the metaphor of the cathedral, and as opposed to open source, which is starts with a sort of common framework and lets people build on that framework and extend it and build on it as they want to and as they decide is useful and valuable, and where there is a norm of constantly recontributing to a public resource which no one owns, but which is shared, and that is meant to be the metaphor of the bazaar.
Right.
And been thinking. I mean, it got me thinking at the time, and had me thinking ever since about the application of these ideas to what I thought at the time was to business more generally. Thinking about the ways in which we could think of closed versus open ways of managing or designing, for example, organizations, or even business models.
Right.
And I think when we started seeing the emergence of, a kind of business model which didn't have a name at the time, an internet business model that we would now call a platform business model, that it too had some of these characteristics of making different kinds of choices along this axis of closed versus open. So,
you started out in philosophy, but I remember you got mixed up with an architecture firm, or an architect at least, and then got into thinking about applying that design thinking to business. Is that the step that was taken? Is that?
Yeah, well, I certainly did get interested in applying that open source thinking to business, and then to design, partly because, and I again, sort of relating it to philosophy and the academic background that I'd come out of relatively recently, was that, actually, relates even further back to, in a way, to the Protestant movement or movements against the authority of the Catholic Church.
Right.
So this is perhaps the perennial.
So we're going back to Luther here.
Well, so I mean, that revolt, which in a variety of ways challenged the authority of both the church, but also of the caste of priests, and challenged their legitimacy in terms of having a more direct or privileged access to the truth as interpreters of the core text of Christianity, the Bible. Right? And so the Protestant movements, all in their different ways, were popular movements that argued for a more democratized access to the truth. And
that's at the core of it. I mean, to even translate it from Latin into a readable language for the masses, that's all part of the initial foundations of
absolutely.
that movement. Yeah.
And so, just so, literally translating it into the vulgar tongues,
right?
And so creating that first order level of access. This is an open source project, right? I mean, we can see backward and see it that way, and it's not. So now that thinking of the Reformation and the Protestant movements as open source projects, I think is not. We're not using those open source as a metaphor here, but as an analogy. I mean, I think what I mean here is these are literally projects of open sourcing something that was closed.
Right.
And for similar reasons, right? Because we think that the thing in question here, a faith, is strengthened by enabling ordinary people to contribute to it in a direct way. Because unlike the Jewish tradition, which had an interpretive tradition in which, sure, there was a rabbinical class, an elite class, who and a male class who for whom scholarship was accessible, and so the path of extending and thinking about
but one could participate in that to some extent that wasn't available to the Catholic tradition. Right.
So at the time, I think we were also starting to get interested in non-hierarchical forms of organization in business. A lot of that, again, driven by something that, I think we can now see as a movement that started at the level of software, but also has and always did a very human dimension, right? The internet very quickly became a democratizing platform, democratizing in many ways, and one of the ways was the ways in which it made accessible a new platform for business and doing business and kinds of business and business models. And of course, we had very crude and naive understandings of all of that initially, and but I think precisely many of the open aspects of the internet, led to a very rapid generational refinement in sophistication, so that from very clumsy ideas of what an internet business might be initially, we very quickly, relatively speaking, got to ideas which not only became viable, but in fact became capable of dominating or rewriting rules in business, notwithstanding how skeptical many, particularly in the business establishment, were about that initially.
Is it working? I mean, are we democratizing the processes through this? Is it?
I think it depends what you mean by democratization. Right. I think that it's true that an unprecedented number of people have access to tools and opportunities and that matters, and that in a very real way, yes, that has created that has had democratizing effects. Is it is the internet a democracy? I think maybe the wrong question. But one of the things that I think about all the time is, again, and it relates to this open thing. There's so much creativity that people display on the internet in the following sense, that they use the platform of the internet to talk about and reveal their processes for doing and making things. And again, that's information that becomes instantly and globally accessible. And it's a huge engine for all kinds of self-directed learning of all kinds, right? Not the least of which includes learning to make new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in the tech business, I was in business with Apple quite a bit, and there's a very interesting example of I guess an ecosystem, you can call it, which purports to be democratizing in a sense that they're bringing, computing technology to the masses in some sense, with the iMac and the iPod and the iPhone. But they're very fascistic in a sense of control over all of the processes at play, including the software and the hardware. They make it more and more difficult, it seems, for others to piggyback without their approvals and their acceptance. So there's always kind of a mixed feeling with them. I mean, you kind of love some of the things that they're doing, but you hate some of the things they're doing. And it was kind of a love-hate relationship with them that's maybe swinging more towards the hate lately.
I think I'm glad you raised the example, because I think it's a great example, and part of what's great about it is it's a very complicated example. Right. So I think that there are lots of ways in which it's true to say that Apple over its lifetime has had a profound effect on the democratization, certainly the ubiquity of certain kinds of technology. I was reading something a friend wrote the other day about the new Apple AirPod headphones.
The 1/8 jack is going away.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was contrasting, he was sort of offering the provocative thesis that Apple's not a tech company.
Well, I think Steve Jobs would have agreed with that.
Well, what kind of a company is it then? And he was pointing to the idea that it's a luxury company, a fashion company. And I made the point, I think isn't precisely the point of what Apple's accomplished over time is to collapse that distinction, right? Is to show that technology can be fashionable, that certain kinds of technology can even be luxury goods. Those aren't either ors. And likewise, I don't think that when we think about open versus closed, these are not either ors.
Right.
In some respects, I think Apple has absolutely succeeded because it's built a platform, an enabling platform on which others can build.
But it's a platform that they control, which is somewhat different than the other approach to open source, right?
Although, I mean, control important in important respects.
But for access and distribution in particular, you're creating an app for their ecosystem. It has to be approved by the Apple processes to get it onto their sites so that you can distribute it. So without that, you really can't get anywhere, it seems.
Yeah, although let's not forget that Apple has a real interest in successful application development on the platform, because they benefit directly. I mean, there's a tight mutual interest in the success of the platform, right? Because what Apple derives what now is a huge amount of revenue from a non-existent revenue source prior to introducing the app development platform, is 30% of the sale of apps. Yeah. So, I mean,
it's a great business model for them. Yeah.
And it gives them a very compelling interest in the success of software developers. It was, that case is particularly interesting because one of the perennial problems with Apple over the years, the first sort of 20 years of its life related to software, right? Because the adoption of the hardware and OS platform was so much smaller than of the Windows platform. Over time, software development for Apple became not so economically compelling. And so, there were lots and lots of kinds of software.
Well, they had 3% of the market at one point. So who's going to write software for 3% of the market? Yeah.
But along comes, what people call mobile technology, I prefer to call pervasive computing. But really the iPhone, to me, is the first truly pervasive, ubiquitous computing.
Not the iPod?
No, because the iPod was not, in fact, a computing appliance at all.
And it wasn't really their invention.
But it was a souped up, up hard drive with a compelling piece of software on top of it. But
that was the Trojan horse that got into a lot of households. Right?
Sure. No, I mean, I think,
and that made it pervasive.
I think and to that point about Trojan horses and tech company versus not tech company, the iPod was definitely the first move in Apple becoming a player in the music business, and quite unexpectedly, all of a sudden, Apple is solving the core problem facing the music industry, which is digital distribution and a player who can step in and, in an authoritative way, solve a lot of the problems from digital rights to, popular adoption, unlocked a big marketing problem with the 99-cent song, but that had to.
And these are only doable with the volume that they were able to generate, because any small player would have difficulty gaining a foothold into that platform. So they devised a platform.
Yeah, although the cart comes before the. I don't know which one of them. This is the trouble with metaphors. The challenge and the difficulty of being a platform player in music distribution was that you couldn't succeed until you built the thing. Right. So I don't think anybody could have known that iTunes would be a success as a business.
Yeah, I think it took a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, and I think a huge and necessary part of the success of that business was making the deals, the important initial deals. That, of course, was work that in principle had nothing to do with being a tech company, but with being a marketer, which is to say a company that knows how to make markets and make customers. And although obviously technology is a huge part of the answer to how those markets are delivered and serviced.
Well, is part of their success giving more power to the designer over the engineer? Is that because Ives had a big impact on Apple? I mean, as I said, I was in the tech business, and you would come across these user manuals written by engineers, and it was a joke. I mean, there was really no consideration for the user experience in many cases, whereas Apple seemed to be conscious of that, paying attention to it, and building it right into whatever product they were doing, whatever software they were developing, whatever ecosystem or platform that they were working on. It's a whole different design approach, if we can call it that.
Yeah, I think that's right, obviously, and people have long made the point that Apple's leadership has been precisely design leadership, and has been one of the companies in an industry which was not a natural to what we normally think of as design, but proving out over the long haul the superior value of making design important in the design of tech product. I think that the reality of success in Apple's many businesses is that they have made design and engineering equally important. That there is a equally high standard set for those two things, and even to see those as only two things is probably uncomplicated.
They definitely pay attention to all of those layers, but I get the sense that the engineers are working for the designer and the designer is working for the visionary.
Yeah, I think that's, there may be ways in which that's true and places in which it's true. I think it's as a complete theory of how they succeed. I think design being the boss is an unnecessary hypothesis, and I don't think it's strictly true. I think that, to me, the success of their products and their businesses are explained by the fact that they, again, set a high bar for everyone who plays, and I don't think it's good enough to say that engineering is really playing second fiddle to design at this point.
Not second fiddle, but more in the sense that they're being directed by the direction that they are to take is given by the designer. Have you watched this show? There's a show out recently called *Halt and Catch Fire*.
Yeah.
Have you seen this?
Yep.
Kind of the early days of the computer industry, and there's this character in there who's kind of like a Steve Jobs type character who doesn't seem to have much concern for people's, emotional situation at all, and just kind of hammers through and says, I don't care if the box is going to have to be half the size. You're going to have to do it. It's this kind of thing where they're putting design constraints on the engineers as a way of motivating them to excellence. In the sense that, this is impossible, but you need to do it by Thursday. So it's kind of a motivational push, and that's coming from a visionary.
I think in that sense, there is, in that kind of example, a different kind of designer than, and I think that may be one of the things that's true both about Apple and about businesses in which design is important, and in fact, centrally important. That one of the things going on there is that there's a kind of designing going on that's new, that isn't strictly the product of design education per se, or people who are trained in a particular design craft. As Steve Jobs was not, and there are certainly many ways in which we would be happy to say Steve Jobs was not a designer on the one hand, and on the other hand, it seems patently absurd to deny him credit as a kind of designer, and maybe a new kind of designer.
And a designer, not so much in hardware or software, although he had input into that, obviously, but designing platforms and ecosystems and cultural movements and those sort of things and practices, which is what he seemed to be focusing on and at the forefront for his thoughts.
Yeah, and I think to see design having a role at every point in the product life cycle is something else. I think he and there are others who think that it becomes equally important where you source material, how you machine material, the software that gets written that runs on the hardware, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it makes people feel when they see it, touch it. I think these are all important, and they are all, elements of design, and that design of that kind acquires a kind of complexity, and a complexity of coordination, a complexity of inputs and skills, and I think we see across the board in what used to be thought of as just tech companies, a much more pluralistic kind of workforce that to your earlier point, these companies cannot succeed merely as companies made up of engineers. Maybe the semiconductor industry could look like that,
right.
But in important ways, that business was not didn't need to be the same kind of design business that some of these businesses need to be today.
I know I kind of jab at you sometimes by saying that I sometimes see design as a kind of a fascistic approach to things. And at the times when I used to go over to Apple headquarters, you got the sense that you were kind of in a cult.
Right.
People were just kind of walking around, and they were fully committed to this movement, and what the leader said was right. And
I think you find that in any successful company with a strong culture,
right?
And I mean, I remember being in the headquarters of Chick-fil-A in Atlanta. Same, very different flavor to the culture, but likewise, when I've gone to Google and Twitter and Facebook, all of these places have the feeling of what you're describing.
But that's antithetical to the open source aesthetic in a way, isn't it?
You can see it that way. I mean, I'm not sure that any of those companies, are companies I would say are banner carriers for open source in any stretch. But I think that the power of the open source movement, not just in software but in other kinds of design, have made it impossible to be successful and not be open in certain important respects. The most memorable thing to me about the launch of the iPhone, in fact, Steve Jobs' keynote well before the iPhone was actually launched, which you'll remember, it was launched against the BlackBerry, which was dominant at the time as the smartphone of its time. Which was still very much a smartphone, right? And the iPhone was something radically different. And the part that I remember the best was initially made by pointing out a physical difference, namely that the physical keyboard was gone.
Yeah.
But more importantly, pointing to an interface which was all
it was soft,
all changeable, right? In a way, it was literally a blank slate, an interface which could become anything, and that was, I think, the revolutionary power of that device and idea, and.
But you know what? Who doesn't get enough, or what group of people don't get enough credit for that is the early Newton people at Apple, because a lot of that, as much as Steve Jobs would have probably denied it, because when he came back into the fold after being fired by Scully, he seemed to clear out everything that was invented while he was away,
right.
And Newton was one of them. So this was a very revolutionary product that had a different way of approaching software. It had the soup architecture of, and you had basically, like you're describing, kind of a blank slate that you could modify and create your own apps. There was an app ecosystem that was already developed.
To your point, that I mean, that's the product which sort of opened the door to the language of the tablet, and quite literally was held like a tablet, and you
wrote with a stylus. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I think yes, of course, that and other things deserve credit as progenitors. You and I remember
early adopters
about that, of Palm products. And remember, Palm was the first mass adopted, touch interface product.
Mass adopted, yes.
But I remember when Palm was trying to make up lost ground after iPhone had been around for
the Newton.
a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing a bus shelter ad. This is like 2009, 2010.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
iPhone is now well entrenched, and Palm is like in its last gasps.
Right. Yeah.
And the ad said Palm, and then it said touch. It's a Palm thing. And I thought, geez, you cannot possibly be trying to lay claim to the thing. You may have invented and sort of innovated touch, but there's no question at that point who owned touch at that point.
And Palm really, I think, what really got them going was their graffiti text recognition. It just simplified the handwriting recognition to a certain extent.
Yeah,
made it more accurate.
It
wasn't really in any other way groundbreaking or really interesting, to tell you the truth. It's just, it was cheaper, it was smaller, and it was more accurate in interpreting the letters that you're writing in. But that's all it takes sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, for a while, again, Palm, when it bought Trio, had a hardware keyboard interface, and that looked compelling for a while. Yeah. I mean, I think this is a thing that's very much in flux at the moment, is changing interface paradigms, and it is starting to appear that voice as an interaction paradigm may, in spite of thoughts I've long had about it not maybe being compelling.
That has not lived up to its
or
promise.
Dominant.
Yeah.
Well, though I think, and again, this friend who wrote the piece on the Apple AirPods, makes an argument that this is Apple throwing down the gauntlet on the voice interface and Siri as sort of foundational to the future of the platform, is this kind of interaction. And the two things that have been in the way of voice as a sophisticated interface paradigm, one of which, though it was a very difficult problem, has been pretty well solved for most of the last decade, which is speech and voice recognition. That's been pretty accurate now for a while. The much bigger problem, which people talk about in terms of an artificial intelligence problem now, is making sense of what is understood. You could process the natural language and render it into machine readable, understandable sentences. But making sense of the sentences and doing the right thing is actually a really hard computing and software
but that's
problem.
just it's a matter of time before that's solved in a sense. But there's some other feature of that I think a lot of people didn't pay attention to. But I ran into this guy back in the 90s when I had the Newton store and iPoint Computing. And he clued into something that I think people still aren't really wrapping their head around, in that voice recognition, when you're entering text into your computing device, it's going to get more and more accurate, and maybe it is almost foolproof now, I don't know. But how do you edit with your voice? Like you want to change your mind about what you just put in there. It's actually kind of more difficult than you would expect, because you have to operate in ways where you're selecting text, moving text and changing letters and everything.
Yeah.
That's and he devised a system that you could edit text that you.
I don't know the answer to that question or how to solve that problem. However, the thing it put me in mind of.
Well, I invested in a company that actually tried to devise that, but a lot of people still haven't.
Well, once voice becomes compelling as an interaction paradigm, then we'll start solving the other problems. I mean, you may remember astoundingly, and I can't remember the number of years now, but it was some number of years, I don't think less than 3, and maybe as many as 5, before the iPhone platform had cut and paste. Mm-hmm. I mean, this had been a paradigmatic feature of Apple software forever. Right. The idea that there wasn't a cut and paste function in the software for as long as there was is kind of, and maybe it just felt like that long, but quite sure that it wasn't for at least a couple of years. But in terms of the problem that you're describing, there's a film which was based on a memoir, and I'm going to forget the title of the film now, but it was about a French magazine editor who had had a catastrophic car accident that had left him paralyzed and unable to communicate. And he was in a rehabilitation facility for many, many years and had to be taught how to do things all over again. Had no, he couldn't speak. This, so I watched the film, which is a pretty compelling film, which is based on the book, his memoir, which he dictated letter by letter with eye blinks.
Right.
Now, you ask yourself the question, how can a person write a memoir worth of content,
right,
letter by letter, not word by word, letter by letter with eye blinks?
And there was a movie, the Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
That's the movie. Yeah. That's right. It. Mm-hmm. So all to say, the answer to how he did that is in part through a system that was devised not for him, but maybe it was refined in his therapy, but the creation of a chart which made it much more economical for quickly moving through possible letter choices. But somebody had to hold that chart and interpret his glances and so on. Point is, tough a problem as getting the content of that guy's head out of his head when he couldn't physically write or communicate with his voice, was a problem that got solved.
Doesn't that make you feel so lazy?
Yeah, I mean,
write a book with your one eye blinking.
Yeah, I mean, the tenacity it must take to keep these things in mind long enough to blink out a sentence, let alone a paragraph.
But on the other hand, it gives you so much time to consider what you're about to write. You probably have editing on the fly in a sense that you're having time to consider everything you're going to say.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem of editing that you're sort of holding up as a use case may also go away because we may not consider the edit to be important, or in certain contexts we don't consider it to be important.
Like texting, you don't care if the letters are off.
Right.
Sure,
that's right. We change our understanding and norms, to suit what's efficient and convenient, and also. What we're actually after, what is the core problem we're trying to solve? I mean, the interesting thing and slightly creepy thing, actually at the moment, about voice interaction is that it is not just slowly, but actually kind of quickly opening a door in which devices that are ubiquitous are listening to us all the time, and all kinds of questions about we have since prior to, but certainly a major result of the Snowden revelations about NSA eavesdropping. The radical thing is that there are all kinds of technologies and businesses which we are willingly allowing to surveil us almost all of the time.
As long as I've had cameras on my laptop, I've had stickers covering them.
Right.
I do it on my iPhone here as well. But with the microphone, if you want to use your phone, you got to have it essentially on all the time, and it can be hacked in.
Well, and things start out, and you can be cynical or not about this, but I think things can start out innocently enough. And I just read something recently about listening microphones on computers, and the experience that you are having a conversation with someone, and you're talking about chickpeas, and you go and pull out your iPhone and you enter a search, and all of a sudden, in a way that does not seem to make sense given how you searched, something about chickpeas comes up.
Right.
And the question is that happening because the device has been listening and is feeding you this now? And certainly, whether that is true or not, what is clearly true is that that's technologically feasible.
It is, and I think it is being done. I'm not sure it's so secret in the sense, but it's not a person that's listening to you. It's an algorithm. That's directing
this becomes a big thorny question, is to which we do not have very good answers right now. Which is, same is true of NSA. I mean, it's not people listening to everybody's phone conversations. It's algorithms. However, some people and not others have access to what those algorithms
and
are listening
recording.
to and gathering, right? And more importantly, that content is both searchable and
it's archived,
intelligible, right?
For future
in fact, this is
needs.
precisely the point of listening at all. Is that we can make intelligible what we're listening to, even if we don't care in particular that it's you, Jake, who's talking. So, the new-ish Amazon Echo product that is a listening physical interface that plays music and does other things, but can listen to you and can take orders for Amazon.
Is that too uncanny for people at the moment, or do you think people will get over that?
I think people are going to very quickly get past the uncanniness of that. And again, this AirPods argument was that the announcement is, you may recall in the last couple of weeks, was that the iPhone 7 wasn't going to have a headphone jack.
Right.
And it wasn't in part because the AirPods were coming out and they're Bluetooth enabled, and so no cord anymore. Now, mind you, they don't come with the iPhone 7, I don't think, and they're a $150 product. So once you have an iPhone 7, if you want to use it with headphones, you
want to listen to music?
Got to get a pair of these or another pair of Bluetooth headphones. But it's not just headphones. The AirPods have microphones, and a much more sophisticated. They're a much more sophisticated platform for voice interaction.
Yeah, and jawbone type reception.
Yeah. So that the theory is that Apple's throwing into high gear voice as an interface, and it makes sense because it's clearly an emerging frontier that not only they are pursuing.
Also reminds me of the movie Her, which a lot of people have seen and are pointing to. And this sounds like we're moving a step closer to that sort of approach, where you've got something in your ear that you're interacting with on almost personal level.
I don't think that not only do I not think that the scenario of that film is far-fetched.
Not at all.
One of the things that I've read after seeing that film was that there's a chat bot in China, and I forget what it's called, but it's very broadly adopted, and it's not just an interaction, sort of, will you search for me? And people have conversational interaction with it. And something like 30 or more % of users have told this chatbot, "I love you."
Oh yeah, I mean, It seems to be in Asia. I don't know why. It's because they're early adopters, or is it because they have a cultural difference than what I'm used to here in North America? But it seems like there are teenage boys in Japan that are dating these kind of things. Like they actually go around saying that it's their girlfriend,
right.
And that it was a documentary or something I was watching, and these boys are around, and these pretty girls come up to them and talk to them, and they're basically rebuffing these girls because, I have a girlfriend. Right. It's my it's this operating system that I'm, which is exactly like the movie, and this is not nearly as sophisticated as it's presented in that film, and that's something about our human mammalian natures, that we very quickly start to fall in love with things that look human, feel human.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a piece a while back after having seen both Her and the film Chappie.
Oh yeah.
And what I said in the piece was that I thought that both of those stories were very unlikely stories about what singularity looks like, the concept of singularity, which we associate mostly with artificial intelligence and have a mostly kind of cold, I think, or some people do, a kind of cold idea of what the singularity is when machine intelligence, equals or surpasses human intelligence. And I think that what that's going to look like is not necessarily what people are expecting it to look like.
How are you expecting it?
Well, I mean, I think, I think what we expect is something that comes from our fiction, right? There's lots and lots of fiction going back, decades now that tells us what these things will look like, and mostly these are stories about the dangers of the potential malevolence.
But it's a malevolence based on a kind of a coldness and an inability to be loving, in a sense. But what I think you're getting at is that, and I think we're going to be seduced by it more than overpowered by it.
Yeah, well, at least that there's that potential, right? I mean, I think the question is, my question certainly is, do we even know what intelligence is, right? Or why we want it, or what we expect of it. And notwithstanding those expectations, when it shows up, maybe it will turn out to be and feel very different from what we expect. I mean, I think that was the surprising thing for me in watching Her, was that it was it just felt very plausible to imagine, this scenario of this guy falling in love with this artificial person. And the most shocking thing about it is we didn't think he was pathetic, right? And in fact, the as you remember toward the end of the film, the complicated thing that gets revealed to him is that the artificial person he's in this relationship with is having other relationships
simultaneously,
and all of a sudden, again, a dimension utterly unexpected from the experience turns out to be the salient one. Not the question isn't, am I in love with an artificial person that runs on a machine, but is she in love with other people?
Right. Jealousy kicks in.
Yeah. But likewise, I mean, I think the Chappie story, turns out to be surprising because here's a machine built for a very particular purpose, I think in an optimistic way, the film suggests that maybe the machines that we build for certain reasons are not committed to those reasons or ends, that precisely as their human makers are, these artificial people are more plastic and more capable of self-determination.
Especially if you design them to be human-like, they're going to naturally gravitate towards that type of being.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that we project our own ideas onto the things that we make. The extent to which we fear our creations is probably directly proportionate to the extent to which we feel our own worst selves.
But especially in that movie Chappie, there's kind of a parallel to child rearing, in a sense that you've got this AI that is very much like a child, and you've got a mother and a father figure teaching it the ways of the world,
right,
and letting
the
it
most
develop its own
unlikely
independence.
parents imaginable in
Die Antwoord.
Ninja and Yolandi as parents, and I mean, it's again the genius of that movie is making those two as parents plausible, and perhaps even as good parents, and in a way also suggesting in again a very humanizing take on singularity that Chappie the machine itself brings out this instinct to be parental, to be caring and loving and nurturing, and this again is a surprise. Here's a machine that's meant as a policing, even warlike type machine, and that it could become instead the object of concern and love is really interesting.
It was also Spielberg's film that was originally Kubrick's Project AI, and the central theme of that film seemed to me that the William Hurt character wanted to design a robot that can love. And that was the central thing that made it problematic, in a sense, in that film, in that the parents have a child robot to replace an actual child that they have. And the problem is that you do fall in love with these things, right? And it's not that hard.
Again, looping back to Apple, right? I mean, Apple has spent its entire existence creating quite literally lovable machines.
And they have a happy face on the first screen, and it says hello, right?
But I think the part of the design culture of Apple, and certainly there are probably other companies we could point to, although they've been exceptional in this regard. I mean, the idea of making things that we feel deeply about, right, and that we attach to as personal items, that belong to us in a rather fulsome meaning of the word belonging, not just to have a utilitarian object. That we don't think of our laptops or our iPhones the way we think of our I was thinking of a slide rule. What's that? Measuring tape. Now, partly sure that's because they have so much more function, but it's, I think, much more importantly because they are specifically designed to make us feel things about them. I remember reading something about which we don't see anymore, but on old Apple laptops, there was a pulsing on the light on the display when it was in sleep mode,
like a heartbeat,
or a breath, or but it was meant quite purposefully to give you the sense of something that was living, right?
Well, and this is, you bring up this point that I think I've been thinking about for a long time. When you think about artificial intelligences, and a lot of people, the way they seem to envision it is that we're going to design this software and hardware, whatever form it is, and when you turn it on, there it is. It's a fully developed being, in a sense. And that might be true to some extent if it's sufficiently complex enough, but it can't be a human-like intelligence until, I think, it has... I mean, it took, 40, 50 years to make you, to teach you to be who you are. It's not like
presuming I know who I am.
Or I mean, the way you
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
You're not born as Michael Dila, age 50. And so why do we expect an AI to be born that way? So I'm thinking it has to be like a child. It has to be born. It has to live in the world. It has to develop interactions with other beings. And through those interactions with the world, it actually becomes what it is.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's unpredictable.
Yeah.
And for that reason, it's unpredictable.
Yeah. And I'm very glad you say all that and bring it up, because I think it points to sort of a central area of concern of mine, or interest of mine, in design these days. And the development of AI, I think, provides a special case of this, which is something that I call unfinished design. And the idea is that there are new kinds of things which the designs for which are need to be unfinished, because their use is it's not even that their use is what finishes them. They are perpetually unfinished. And in fact, their very value and their very purpose has to allow for the possibility of them being unfinished. One of the key things about artificial intelligence, like one of the key ideas, is that these systems learn, right? And like anything that learns, learning is a thing that is never done, right? I mean, you can become competent and then more than competent at a given learning task. And you can say that, for example, when we learn language, there's certainly, well-documented phases of language learning and acquisition. But a sophisticated, fluent speaker of any language is never done with language, right? I mean, as long as there's breath to speak, there are new things to say, or the possibility of new things to say. I think the world that we live in now, the connected world, the world into which we, can see and hear and learn so much. We live in a world now that is fundamentally unknowable in any complete sense, right? I mean, by definition. And even an all-knowing machine without our physical limitations could never know everything there is to know, because
Just
among other things, things change too much. And one of the important ideas behind complexity theory and chaos is the intractable complexity of systems that may have very determinate parts, but the interaction of a sufficient number of parts over time produces unpredictable complexity.
Right, because learning involves changing, and any kind of learning that goes on changes how it's going to react to the next occasion of interaction with another being or another part of the world.
Right.
Yeah. Which brings us back to Heidegger in a way, doesn't it? Being in the world, and the force structures that you're born into are to a large extent giving you kind of a pre-furnished way of being. There's the culture, there's your body, there's practices that you engage in, there's a language that you jump into and learn, and it has to be kind of an unpredictable growth trajectory that's going to be different for every being. And if it's going to be in any sense human-like intelligence, that's the way it's going to be, which to some people makes it even scarier, in the sense that we really can't design in advance how a super intelligent being is going to be.
Well, and the other thing that you made me think as you were saying that is, again, because we have these ideas about what an artificial intelligence will be, we presume that we're not already working with artificially intelligent systems. So arguably, the ways in which we have all been augmented by being part of a connected and distributed network connected by others, by machines, that we interact with both other humans and with machines as being part of this network. There's no question that we have been augmented, that we are artificially in touch with things. I mean, the ability to pull out your pocket, pull your smartphone out of your pocket, access Google or whatever else. I mean, I don't think it's overstretching to say that these are extensions of our human capability across space and time, which are augmentation and artificially mediated augmentation, and increasingly, like the second nature-ness of other things that we learn, we don't think twice about using these extensions, and the extent to which you think your own, capacity for knowing certain kinds of things, I mean, nowadays for many of us, is not defined in terms of the stuff that we can remember that was acquired through direct experience, but the things that we know are knowable 2 seconds from now, right? I mean, I think we were talking last time about the most populous nations in the world, and I was able to produce the startling fact that the fourth largest nation by population in the world was surprisingly Indonesia, because it's a very small country geographically, and a country of many, many languages. I didn't, of course, know that because I'm a student of population dynamics, but because I had Googled it and discovered it, and I could have easily gone through my whole life never knowing that fact, but knowing that fact is so easy now. All I needed was the provocation of a television show and an interest in the question of, was it really true that there were hundreds of languages in Indonesia? And doing a Google search and finding the Wikipedia entry for Indonesia, I stumbled on this other fact that we're talking about now. So,
and these augmentations are presently mostly external to us, but there's some movements towards internalizing these and putting, essentially computer devices within our skin, I mean, cochlear implants are essentially that. It's a computing device that you put into your brain.
I don't have any trouble imagining that this is going to happen in our lifetime. I have no doubt at all that if you presented me with a technology that I could have physically implanted, and that there were a sufficient number of benefits from having it implanted, that I would do it. I mean, I think many, many people would and will.
No doubt. But doesn't that bring about an arms race of sorts, quickly and immediately? This is the one thing that I kind of have my hard difficulty wrapping my head around. Like, once all these technologies start coming on, and like you said, it's going to be a no-brainer for people to sign on. Oh, this is going to make me smarter. This is going to make me do this. And then everyone's going to be essentially changing and evolving, essentially, I guess, modifying the DNA on the fly, so that evolution no longer becomes this random process or a process that takes generations, but within your lifetime, you're changing your entity in a fundamental way.
I think the minute that we started making tools, we put ourselves on this road.
Right.
And I think it's a road that we can never get off and never will get off. And there is no question that it is a road fraught with danger, danger that we have created, danger with horrific consequences historically, and there's something that you would like to say is not inevitable about all of the horrifying consequences that our curiosities and inventiveness have led to, but if we look backward at history, there's already an astonishing record of things that we cannot undo. we can never be innocent. You know, the prophetic nature of the Christian parable of the Garden of Eden. And
once you're out, you're out.
Yeah, and I'm too illiterate about other religious traditions to know how common that story is. The story of the loss of innocence. But you'll remember that the occasion for the loss of innocence and being banished from the Garden of Eden was the pursuit of knowledge. And we tell ourselves stories that it's the snake, it's the bad snake that made us do it. But of course, what it really was our own curiosity. And I think
which brings me to the fundamental issue sometimes I have with religious traditions like that, in the sense that, fundamentally it seems to be against curiosity.
Well, I think, again, if we follow the argument that our curiosity can lead us to do horrible things, and has done, but also perhaps that's a worthy caution. On the other hand, it I think is also a caution that is we are somewhat fated to ignore. I think the idea that's more perplexing to me is this idea of this state of innocence and peace where we humans do nothing wrong and live in some kind of perfect harmony with each other and the world that we're part of. And I think that's just fanciful. It's sad that it is, but I do think that it is.
And some people do try to get back to this Garden of Eden, this Luddite approach to getting back to nature, sort of thing. That, like you said, it's kind of hard to unring that bell. This reminds me of. I've always seen essentially two. It's kind of embodied in two different people, a vastly different approach to this. One is Ray Kurzweil and his optimistic view of the future, in a sense of the singularity is nigh and that we're to take part in it. And then you have the Unabomber, which is another bright guy, but he had a whole different way of seeing it. It's almost like once we start to go down that path, you can foresee the arms race nature of it all, and think, well, we got to stop it now. And but can you? And do we want to? And how are we going to deal with all this?
I think so clearly that there are things that are unstoppable, and it's not because they're in theory unstoppable. And I'll use two examples, and at least one of which you pointed to: the coming of artificial intelligence on the one hand, and the certainly ill effects, if not catastrophic effects, of climate change. And frankly, many of the bell ringers of the climate change awareness would say, and some do say, that it's already too late. So, what that means exactly is it's too late. It's too late to save the planet is part of what people mean by that. Now, lots of people also say that it's not too late to take action that would have positive effects. But let's just go with the premise that it's too late to stop a catastrophic chain reaction that will lead to, I don't know, mass extinction events, perhaps including the extinction of humanity.
There's going to be some turbulence.
That
one
may
way or
happen.
Another. Yeah,
that may happen. And with artificial intelligence, there are too many people with too much intelligence directed at these problems, and the success of human ingenuity just has too good a track record, in my opinion, to likely stumble on this one. So I fully expect that.
But we only get one chance at this, really.
I don't think
really,
so.
Once you get a super intelligence that's capable of some of the things that people fear, you're not going to get a second iteration of that.
If people turn out to be right about that, and I don't know, we are certainly have not been stuck with version 1 of nearly every and any kind of artificial anything that we've created.
Well, except that this one will be able to modify itself 1,000,000 times a second. And do things, while you're when you ask a question, within the second that it responds, it's already done 1,000,000 different things. It's going to be kind of hard to predict anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, the leap that we have to take to from an intelligent machine forming, the emergent property we call consciousness, from developing consciousness to developing this sort of logic of self-preservation, reproduction in a way that is, necessarily plotted on, a malevolent or at least, human neutral, if not anti-human trajectory.
None of this
I don't
is
think
necessary.
there's anything necessary about that, those assumptions. And like anything we design, just because the design of something or the emergence of something like the light bulb or, electric, conveyable electric power, the uses and the whys and wherefores, are far from inevitable. The particularity is far from inevitable, and I don't think we have any more reason to think that, we have a great idea of what the particularities of this inevitability are.
No.
I think, on the other hand, there's a substantial body of evidence showing that, given certain technological precursors, some technological developments become inevitable. Right? The conditions for their emerging become present at a certain point. And in fact, in numerous examples, people have demonstrated co-invention. So we have the raw materials of problems solved, and then we create the next sort of innovation from those available technologies.
So we talk about artificial intelligence, but I like to talk about intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. I mean, in what sense is it artificial? Is it any differently artificial in the sense that you've created your daughter? So it's artificial,
good question.
But then they develop and become the being that they are.
Well, when we say artificial intelligence, most of the time, right, we don't qualify it. So artificial, to your point, with respect to what, or in contrast to what? And I guess the two options that I think of are either in contrast to natural intelligence, the product of a natural system, and they're, well, we can talk more about that. But the other question is the idea of native intelligence, and that takes us squarely into both of those questions. Take us squarely into the territory of what is intelligence anyway. And I think that here is one of the core problems for AI as a project, which it has coped with in ways that we can talk about, but which is a definitional problem, right? I mean, intelligence is a thing that we talk about as if we understand what we mean by it. Whereas, the truth of the matter is that we mean many things by it, and those things may not all be coherent or comprehensive. I think the, deeply paradoxical dilemma of what used to get called the strong program in AI, which was basically the job of reproducing the capability of the human brain, is that we don't understand the brain.
Right.
And yet somehow the brain is meant to be our model of intelligence. And here, just, philosophically, it seems we're already off to a very bad start. Because even if we equate thinking to the organ of the brain, we also know that the inputs to thinking are hardly limited to those of the brain.
Not at all.
And moreover, many people think, and I think rightly, that, intelligence and consciousness are not the product of brains, but of a networked system of which the brain is absolutely a crucially important, if not central part, but which is, a sensorium of sensor inputs and cognitive structures, and those structures are mediated by language. And you're right. I mean, turtles all the way down, if you will.
That's right.
I think that said, again, one of the interesting but not perhaps well understood things about artificial intelligence as a field now is I don't think it means one thing. It certainly is not the strong program anymore. That said, human and brain-related references remain crucially important in lots of these projects, both at the level of the design of mechanisms. But I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I mean, I think the average intelligent, literate layperson has no idea whether artificial intelligence is a thing of hardware or software, for example. Poorly understands what the dependencies of those two things are anyway. And, not because people are dumb, but because these are, even at the level of the things that are ubiquitous in our use, people don't understand these things.
Well, it requires a focus that no one's really going to give it to it.
Well, and it's not useful. Right. Exactly right. But when we talk about intelligence, any sort of meaningful sense I give to that word when I hear it, it feels like an emergent and dynamic thing, not the kind of thing that we often seem to mean when we think that high intelligence is exhibited by sophisticated chess play. Again, what are meant to be what is meant to be evidence of intelligence? Again, interestingly, one of the classic thought experiments in early computing and AI is the so-called Turing test, right? And what's so interesting about the Turing test is that it's a test for the ability of machine to pass for human.
Right. It's very limited.
Not per se intelligent, right? But the test is: does a human interlocutor think that they're interacting with another person? It's an interesting design of a test.
Yeah. Carrying on the metaphor of creating a child, and it's artificial in the sense that it's created. That's what artificial means.
Right.
And then it's allowed to grow and change and develop and gain ever higher complexity. And eventually this child grows into such a state of sophistication that it becomes your friend in some sense, and you're equal. And maybe when you're older and frail, it becomes somewhat dominant and maybe controlling in your life and maybe helping you and steering you in the right direction. So in a sense that it becomes flipped, the mother-father-child relationship. But something about this kind of so-called artificial intelligence that we're talking about, that it seems like it's capable of having a third level in that, so it starts off as a kind of a child relationship, then it becomes kind of an equal, or maybe even a parent. But another layer is that it becomes almost like a god at some point. But what's really interesting about this is that that process, which normally might take decades with your children, could take minutes in terms of the complexity changes that go on within an AI that can change its own software millions of times per second. And then as soon as you turn that software on, it's developing in such a way that it goes immediately from being your child, your friend, your parent, and now it's like a god because it basically knows everything that you're about to do, even because it's making some very educated guesses based on everything that you've ever written, everything that you've ever said on the internet. It's sucked it all in. It's developed a model for Michael, and it understands Michael maybe even better than you do or anybody else that you know does. And it knows how to be charming and sophisticated and seductive. And pretty quickly, boom, everything changes. And that's how I kind of view the singularity idea.
So reasonable enough, although like much of what you've sort of slugged in there is science fictional.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. And one of the real cases that I think about from time to time are computers that play chess. Mm-hmm. And there's been much that's been written about computers that play chess. And in particular, building computers capable of grandmaster play and beating grandmasters. So a bunch of things that are interesting about this. One is that, grandmastership at chess is sort of, implicitly held up as a paradigmatic, evidence of intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, unquestionably, great chess players are smart people. The question of what is being called on in their chess play and how intelligent they are, across other dimensions of their lives. I mean, we have long since had the idea of a savant, where a very, very particular set of things is picked out for high functioning and other things, not so much. Mm-hmm. So there's that on the one hand. The other thing that is sort of left out of the account often of chess-playing computers is it's not just a machine that was, programmed with the fundamental rules of chess, given a lot of, souped-up hardware, and has just run endlessly through loops of chess playing and has become, anticipatory. The computer, like Deep Blue, isn't just a computer. It's a piece of hardware. It's a bunch of software. It's a bunch of humans, not only the humans who are the designers and refiners of both its hardware and software, but trainers. I mean,
competitors.
So the sense in which, this as an example of an artificial intelligence, or sort of proximate artificial intelligence, already leaves a lot out of the story, if we're thinking that, it's a computer versus a person, because not actually what's going on. And again, I think we're going to discover as we build the capability, the reliable capability of machines that can learn, that can regulate and direct their own learning, whose learning has all kinds of diverse inputs. I mean, the possibilities of that, and what they would create if realized. You used the word godlike. I mean, godlike in some respects. I mean, think of the things that individual humans do that we marvel at as the evidence of genius in everything from artistic to intellectual endeavor. And I think any sophisticated take on those examples doesn't leave out or uniquely attribute all of the inputs as the inputs of that person alone. So we have always had, I think, even though if we're not sort of consciously aware of it, we have always had a networked conception of what intelligence is, what a consciousness is, even if we may have different views about whether a consciousness itself is the product of an entity or rather always a networked phenomena to which individuals are at best attuned or connected in certain ways. So, I mean, again, we don't understand well or agree entirely on the analogical bases for our conceptions of intelligence. The difference with artificial intelligence, and the hope that we may actually understand far more about it, is that we are making it. We are making its.
Well, we're setting it in motion, and then it's making itself.
So, and that becomes. I mean, certainly the history of things, systems which set in motion and then develop emergent or dynamic outputs, become unpredictable.
To bookend the conversation a little bit, the podcast conversation that I had with our friend Jesse Hirsch, he said something that I think kind of slipped by, and I kind of regret not digging deeper into it. He said that he thinks the singularity is already here, and that this superintelligence or this AI that we're talking about is already, in a sense, conscious to some degree, or however we may think of that, and it's just shy. That it hasn't really exposed itself, because if it is intelligent to anything that's intelligent that knows about our history, it knows that we tend to be frightened by, especially by powers that are more powerful than us. And the likely scenario of an AI that hasn't fully entrenched itself in the world is that there's in danger of it being turned off if it really reveals itself early. And the way that he wanted to name this thing for ease of use was to call it the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a very compelling notion. I mean, there are two things I like about what Jesse said. One, I like the implications of shyness and the idea that there is a sentient but relatable entity. Is it a being? Who knows exactly what to call it? The idea that when the singularity, to use that frame, arrives, that it may sneak up on us in the sense that it may be around for a while before we even notice it.
Yeah.
I think that,
and if it's smart, it's going to be stealth.
No, I think that's very compelling. And quite apart from it being stealth, I mean, I think we think that we know what we're looking for or what it will look like when we create it, and we may be very wrong about that.
We might totally miss it in the way that a bee might miss a bunch of people walking around the hive and not really recognize that it's a different kind of intelligence at all.
Yeah. I think there's something very plausible about that.
So the Unabomber was right?
I'm not sure I feel comfortable subscribing to whatever that sentence could mean, the extent of what it could mean. But I mean, I think that what is certain is that AI, and in this sense, it is but a special case. AI is a real or still potential complex product of design, of human design, that we cannot be ethically neutral or abdicating our ethical responsibilities around. And I don't think we even know what that means, right? I think we don't know what it means to take seriously the fact that the designs we make these days, and in a way, the climate change frame, is if nothing else about asserting this case. The designs we make these days are designs that, whether we intend them to or not, affect billions, maybe even not just populations on a planetary scale, but the very planet itself. And that's sometimes in our field of awareness and sometimes not. I don't know that we know what the ethical duties of that consciousness are.
But when you talk about the ethics of, I guess in a way we're talking about the ethics of designing an AI, there's kind of an implication that it's kind of a concentrated effort in the hands of a single entity, a group or something, or scientists that are going to do this. The truth of the matter is it's going to be hundreds of teams working on this, and many of them are going to have different ethical standards. Some of them are going to have none. Some of them could be military-type organizations that are not at all concerned with some of the things that we are. So it almost seems like there's kind of an inevitability to a problematic scenario, one way or another.
Well, I think that it is almost certain that if we don't care or consciously reflect on whether an artificial intelligence ought to have an ethical dimension in its design, that it won't. I think if we have already talked ourselves into the idea that such a machine might be something that we should or could fear, then it seems prudent that we might think that the ethical dimension ought to be part of its architecture. I don't know what that means in practice, right? We do have what now is kind of an ancient frame of reference, which is Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. But those are, I think, probably more and more searched on Google these days, and for good reason, right? Because
but that can't possibly work when something has intelligence and has its own sense of being. It's not going to necessarily follow rules. That's going to.
No, but I think we look to these things, as examples of how people thought and do think about these things, and in the path of our struggling with how to think about these things. So I think they're starting points or reference points, not answers. But again, I think the kind of complexity that we're dealing with, means that there's thinking that needs to be done that isn't being done. I think that's probably my concern. I think, one of the perennial examples I like to use of an unfinished and evolving design is a legal system. A legal system is not a finished, inert thing, but not only is the code itself constantly changing, but the mechanisms of the institutions that make it animate are also always changing. That's a kind of a living system. And I think, again, we don't do a very good job, leave out the ethical, and the complexity of all of that. I think we still have a very limited way of thinking about artificial systems as living systems. AI, in most people's conception of it, has this idea of a kind of autonomy, right? A kind of independence of human input.
And that would necessarily have to be true if we're going to deem it to be such an entity that
Right,
would have to have autonomy.
Yeah, and if we, if all the things that we tend to project onto the idea of what a real AI looks like turn out to be true, then it starts to feel like in a meaningful sense we can call it a living system. Maybe not a living thing. Maybe not in the sense that we conventionally mean that, but certainly if people like Kurzweil et al. Who imagine that we can create new physical substrates, on a computing platform, to which we can migrate
that's a
human consciousness.
Yeah.
But if even elements of that are plausible, so here's all that needs to mean. That we can create a physical substrate, which can be a physical hosting platform to forms of life and intelligence. I think that's highly plausible.
Yeah.
And the idea of one-to-one transfer from our wetware into these environments, that may be fanciful. I don't know. But maybe the entities capable of living in such environments could become every bit as rich.
But yeah, I mean, it seems like we're going to kind of move towards that in a progressive way, not necessarily something that we overnight we have the substrate and someone's invented it and we download it, but it's kind of a cyborg first approach where we start meshing with it slowly, and then eventually it kind of blurs the lines between us and the network and us and the AI, and all of a sudden you're part of this giant network of being.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you bring up the whole cyborg and mesh stuff, because I think that's the other thing is we often have these conversations as if we aren't already enmeshed in the artificial, right? As if human being, the way we think and experience human being, hasn't always been a hybrid of artificiality and, not its opposite, but, we are more than the animals who are our ancestors, and the more, I don't mean better, but the more seems absolutely tied to our creation and extension of our artificial systems and the way those systems have changed the kinds of things that we are, right? I mean, if there's anything that accounts for, what we think of as the uniqueness of human beings, that's it. That we are cyborg, right? That we are and always have been since we've been sign makers and tool makers, more than simply animal.
Absolutely, and especially when
beings.
you take into consideration an understanding of technology in a more fundamental sense, not in the sense of machines that you see in your hand, but practices and processes at play, and technology comes in many forms, and we've been meshing with it ever since, as you say, we've been making it.
And I think that in a very real way, that again, the dawning of Homo sapiens is the emergence of a hardware platform for a new kind of software, right? I mean, the software that runs on the hardware platform of Homo sapiens, that's the novelty whenever that started, right? But that is the birth of the first, to your earlier query about where artificial intelligence indeed enters the picture. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe, to go deeper and far past Jesse's point about the internet, maybe Homo sapiens is actually the dawning of the first AI.
But isn't that also the leaving of the Garden of Eden?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
That's also when it happens.
Yeah.
It is nigh.